welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into what is honestly one of the most high-stakes puzzles of our time. I'm talking about the super fragile architecture of our modern global supply chains. If you've been keeping even half an eye on international trade or geopolitics lately, you know the world is in the middle of a massive structural transition. I mean, countries are rapidly waking up to the fact that relying on a single source for the literal building blocks of their economies, that's a massive vulnerability. So today, we're going to break down how India is proactively positioning itself for the future. We'll map out their highly structured, multi-layered strategy across the globe, from locking down raw materials in South America all the way to securing cutting-edge, high-tech capabilities over in Europe.
Okay, so let's dive right into this. The whole China plus one phrase gets thrown around a lot in economic circles, right? But how does a nation actually build that out in the real world? Well, it's not just about signing a few flashy trade deals and calling it a day. It requires a highly coordinated ground-up approach. It means literally digging into the earth to secure physical resources, buying the highly specific machinery needed to process them, and then partnering with nations that can help safeguard all those new trade routes. Today we're going to see exactly how all these seemingly totally different elements connect to form one unified master plan.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the global supply chain race, securing critical minerals, the Dutch semiconductor play, the Nordic strategic gateway, and finally, how all of this comes together to form a new geopolitical blueprint.
Section 1. The Global Supply Chain Race.
To truly understand the big geopolitical moves happening right now in 2026, we first have to acknowledge a pretty basic truth. Modern 21st century economies run entirely on critical minerals and microchips. From the smartphone you're probably holding right now, to electric vehicles, to highly advanced defense systems, these are the indispensable ingredients. And right now, that global supply chain is incredibly fragile. China currently controls roughly 70% of global rare earth mining and an absolutely staggering 90% of global processing. The rest of the world combined, just a tiny sliver. This immense market concentration is exactly what recently spurred the United States to announce Project Vault, which is a massive $12 billion initiative just to build up a strategic stockpile and shield its own manufacturers from sudden supply shocks. That reality alone explains why supply diversification, that crucial plus one in China plus one, has become an urgent priority for literally everyone.
Section 2. Securing critical minerals.
And that brings us to the very first piece of India's strategic jigsaw puzzle. Because before you can manufacture anything, you need the raw materials. To make sure it isn't left empty-handed during this massive global transition, India launched its National Critical Mineral Mission in 2025, and they backed it with a massive 34,300 crore rupee budget. So they aren't just talking about supply chain security in theory, they are funding a massive end-to-end infrastructure overhaul to actually achieve it.
So how exactly is that money being spent? Well, it's structured across 4 distinct pillars. Internationally, they are using project-level diplomacy to de-risk their supply. Fun fact, they are the only developing country in the 14-nation Mineral Security Partnership. Domestically, they are funding a massive exploration blitz. We're talking over 1,200 projects. Then, through a state-owned entity called Cobalt, they are directly hunting for resource ownership abroad. And finally, they are pushing hard for a circular economy through a domestic recycling incentive scheme.
Let's actually look a bit closer at those last 2 pillars, because this is where the strategy gets very real, very fast. Through Cobalt, India isn't just signing contracts to buy ore from other people, they're going out and buying the physical mining infrastructure themselves. They've secured a 15,703-hectare lithium block in Argentina. To put that into perspective, that is a plot of land larger than many major cities, and they're evolving toward equity partnerships in places like Australia and Chile too. But at the exact same time, they launched a 1,500 crore rupee urban mining incentive. Basically, this means they're aggressively recovering valuable stuff like lithium and cobalt from end-of-life batteries and e-waste right at home.
Section 3. The Dutch semiconductor play. Okay, so you've secured the raw earth. Awesome. What's next? Well, you desperately need the capacity to turn that dirt into advanced chips. Enter ASML. Now, this is a Dutch company you might never have heard of, but it holds an effective global monopoly on the highly specialized lithography machines required to print advanced chips. Seriously, without their deep ultraviolet systems, advanced chip fabrication is practically impossible. This single company's immense technological bottleneck is exactly why Prime Minister Modi's May 2026 visit to the Netherlands was an absolute geoeconomic game-changer.
During that visit, a landmark agreement was inked between India's Tata Electronics and ASML. Basically, ASML is going to support Tata's new 300mm commercial chip fab in Dilera, Gujarat, which will target chips in the 28 to 110 nanometer range. But what makes this absolutely crucial is the timing. India is securing its entry into the advanced semiconductor supply chain at the exact same moment the U.S. is actively pressuring the Netherlands to restrict Chinese access to these very same machines. Oh, and to make sure they actually have the top-tier talent needed to run this world-class tech, they launched a brain bridge linking Dutch universities with Indian institutes of technology. Brilliant, right?
But it's worth noting that this strategic partnership with the Netherlands extends well beyond just microchips. They are leveraging Dutch expertise across a bunch of sectors. They've signed a dedicated roadmap on green hydrogen cooperation to match production tech with India's own domestic energy goals. They're collaborating on the massive Kalpasar water engineering project in Gujarat, and they're even formalizing joint cybersecurity efforts. It is a highly localized, deep partnership that serves a much broader strategic goal.
Section 4. The Nordic Strategic Gateway.
So after securing raw materials and high-tech manufacturing, a growing superpower needs to foster broader defense, security, and innovation ties. And for this, India shifted its gaze slightly north. To understand this move, we are drawing directly from some fantastic academic research titled India-Sweden Ties as a Gateway to India-Nordic Engagement, published by the Institute for Security and Development Policy in Stockholm. This research perfectly frames how Sweden, which is the largest Nordic economy and actually the first to publish an independent Indo-Pacific strategy, serves as a vital entry point for India's broader European security cooperation.
Now, what's fascinating is how incredibly pragmatic this relationship is. If you look at their defense ties, there are some pretty obvious structural limitations. The Nordics are overwhelmingly focused on European and Russian threats, while India, of course, maintains historical ties with Russia. But rather than forcing a square peg into a round hole, they are just bypassing those limitations entirely. Instead, they're focusing on highly specific, niche opportunities. Think tech transfers for counter-drone systems, or localized manufacturing, like the Swedish defense giant Saab setting up a Carl Gustaf production facility right there in India.
To cement this bond, they didn't just talk, they took some very concrete diplomatic steps in Gothenburg. First, they formally elevated their ties to a strategic partnership. Second, they launched a dedicated tech and AI corridor to co-develop future technologies. And third, they set a hard, ambitious target to double their bilateral trade over the next 5 years.
Plus, partnering with Sweden acts as the perfect doorway to the NB8, the Nordic-Baltic 8. Engaging this broader bloc of nations is a crucial, tech-savvy opportunity for India to expand its footprint in Europe through some of the most innovative markets on Earth. Together, they are focusing on maritime domain awareness, collaborating on Arctic governance, and developing sustainable blue economy initiatives. Ultimately, this is all about securing vital future trade routes and proactively managing the world's shifting resources.
Section 5. A new geopolitical blueprints. When you zoom out and synthesize all of this, the critical mineral missions in South America, the Dutch high-tech deals, the Nordic innovation gateways, India's 2026 positioning suddenly becomes incredibly clear. Just listen to the diplomatic tone in this quote from the recent India-Netherlands joint statement. They're calling for an Indo-Pacific based on international law and the absence of coercion. What's so interesting here is the very neutral, shared diplomatic language. Without explicitly endorsing ideological sides or pointing fingers at specific adversaries, it signals a clear strategic alignment on maritime security and supply chain safety between these major European and Asian powers.
So the core takeaway is this: the true China plus one strategy is no longer just some abstract theory you read about in an economics textbook. It is a highly localized, deeply pragmatic blueprint that is unfolding right now. It combines massive domestic funding for extraction and recycling, extremely targeted high-tech alliances for semiconductor fabrication in Europe, and niche defense and innovation partnerships up in the Nordics. These aren't random moves. They are intentionally designed to mitigate risk, secure national interests, and build a genuinely resilient economy right in the middle of a global transition.
Which leaves us with a pretty compelling question as we wrap up today's explainer. We've watched the board being set here in 2026, but as these massive fabs are physically built, as these new global mineral supply chains are rerouted, and as these new tech corridors come fully online, how will these deeply localized, highly strategic partnerships fundamentally reshape the broader global balance of power over the next decade? It is a